We're both wearing turtlenecks. And wait, mine's a short sleeve too. Oh, it's very in.
Yeah, it's perfect for this California winters, you know?
Yeah, it is.
It's not quite cold enough.
Hey, Rick? Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Hello? Hi. I can't hear anybody. Can't hear you.
There we go.
Ah, now I can hear. Hey.
Hey, sorry I did not text you back.
Oh, I figured you'd been pretty busy.
I know. Run down ragged.
Pretty exciting, huh?
We're ready to go. Okay. Is that me?
Good Lord, what's going on?
You muted, Sarah?
I'm muted.
Oh, I'll get on mute too.
Maybe microphone. 1 sec. Sorry.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's webinar titled Women Waging Peace. We're so glad to have you here and to be able to come together around two women who are incredibly accomplished and influential. Christine Ahn here with us at NAPF's office in Santa Barbara, and Medea Benjamin coming to us via Zoom from DC. Hi, Medea. Thank you so much for being with us. We have an audience here at the Foundation and online representing a broad range of ages, professions, schools, and cultures, united in our interests regarding peace, Korean relations, women's leadership, and nuclear disarmament. As we start a discussion, our online guests are welcome to ask questions through the chat icon at the bottom of our Zoom bar there. It says Q&A, and we'll do our best to address those as we can. Christine is, among many other things, the founder and international coordinator of Women Cross DMZ, a global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War, reunite families, and promote women's leadership in the peace process. We are so lucky to have Christine as NEPF speaker for tonight's 17th annual Frank K. Kelly Lecture. Medea is, among many other things, the co-founder of Code Pink, a women-led grassroots organization working to end U.S. wars and militarism, and to redirect our tax dollars into healthcare, education. In 2017, Medea was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and in 2014, NEPF was very privileged to give her our Distinguished Peace Leadership Award. In addition to their separate projects, Christine and Medea have experienced significant success working together. Christine was just telling me a bit about that, so maybe I'll leave that for you guys to talk about. But South Korea together as part of Women Cross DMZ. They organized peace symposiums with a delegation of 30 women from 15 countries in both Seoul and Pyongyang. Just their work with that is really incredible and very inspirational. So considering their work together, our conversation today is very timely, just thinking about yesterday's announcement that Kim Jong-un is considering negotiating with the US. President Trump's response to that was typical President Trump. He tweeted, the US is ready to go hard in either direction, whatever that means. Yeah. So, considering all of that, considering the seeming progress between North and South Korea, the ongoing Me Too movement and discussion of women's rights that is amplifying, and constant discussion of Trump's nuclear button, we have some good things to talk about today. So without further ado, Medea and Christine, thank you so much for being with us. And I'm just going to ask a couple questions. Feel free to answer them in any order you want to, or to not. Just talk about whatever you'd like to. But would you, to start with, each just take a few minutes to tell us about yourselves and your current work, and what do you think is important for women waging peace, and how has that informed your work? And what is the importance of women waging peace? Christine, if you'd like to start.
Well, first of all, I just want to say hi to my dear teacher and mentor, Medea Benjamin. She's one of the most extraordinary activists, I think, and I have followed her and have been honored to work and, follow in her footsteps and chase her around and drag her into lots of things. But so in 2006, actually, Medea and I went to South Korea to protest actually what is now the largest U.S. military base in Pyeongtaek, South Korea. There was a pretty long resistance. There was a daily candlelight vigil held by farmers that had been working the land for 3 generations. It's beautiful rice fields, and it's the U.S. Camp Humphreys base. And so Medea and I went with Cindy Sheehan and other activists to protest that. And Medea is always, of course, pushing the edges. They were ready to cut the barbed wire fence going into the Camp Humphreys base, but luckily we convinced her not to do that. But anyway, I've been very busy, obviously. I think everybody has been busy since the Trump administration, but I think those of us that have been working on Korea policy, on North Korea, has been kind of doing double time. So it's both terrifying, and I mean, in some ways, I don't mean to use Trump's words about it could go hard either ways, but we are kind of in this moment where there is the potential of going to nuclear war, or the potential of actually seeing peace on the Korean Peninsula. So Women Cross DMZ has been basically trying to mobilize women peace activists and others, really trying to bring together a broad coalition to advocate for long-term resolution to the Korean conflict. And I am now very busy working on 2 pieces. One is trying to do another DMZ crossing in May, because 2018 is a historic anniversary. It's the creation of 2 separate states, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north and the Republic of Korea in the south. And given the kind of threats of a bloody no strike, the threats of a potential war, a new Korean war on the Korean Peninsula, we feel it's really important for women around the world to kind of embrace the inter-Korean peace process, to wrap our arms around Korean women, to say no new Korean war. women call for peace, women call for maximum engagement. So it's complicated because you have to get permission from the both Korean governments. So North Korea, obviously, very difficult to try to get any kind of correspondence. But I do have a regular contact at the DPRK mission at the UN. I go and meet with him regularly. I send him my ideas. I usually get concerned, obviously, and want the international solidarity right now. And obviously South Korea. So 3 South Korean women are coming to New York. That's where I'm heading to after Santa Barbara to talk about the activities. And Medea has signed on to join that crossing again. And so that's one piece. And then the other piece is working on launching a women-led peace treaty campaign with a goal to have some kind of process by 2020 that we are in I feel like my husband always says, but you always say this, we're in a historic moment. But we are in a historic moment, and I think that has a lot to do, obviously, with the threat that Donald Trump poses, but Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, he has 5 years in his short term. And as we have witnessed in the last few months, thick footwork, it is so refined. It is so, he's so agile and able, I think, to move quite a bit. And he has made a commitment to see a peace treaty in his term. So I feel like the peace movement must mobilize now. This is a 65-year, almost 70-year conflict. This is the longest U.S. war that has not been resolved. And we need the U.S. peace movement to join with South Korea. So that's what I've been working on. And why women? Why women? I mean, I have to just say the last few weeks, tensions just reached a boiling point last year. And people were saying, like, what's the same Haas from the Council on Foreign Relations was saying, there's a 50% chance of war. I mean, the way that a lot of these analysts just kind of military. We know what the congressional services said, research services said in the opening days of a military conflict on the Korean Peninsula, 300 people would be killed. And if there were nuclear weapons used, and we know North Korea had 5 million people would be impacted. So, I mean, it's just insanity to me that the Trump administration uses such terms like using a bloody nose strike, or even preventive war. I mean, this is illegal. This is absolutely illegal to wage a preemptive strike on a country because they are seeking, I don't mean to justify their pursuit of nuclear weapons, but given the history of what happened with Iraq, with Libya, and their own history of surviving indiscriminate bombing, I can understand why North Korea has felt they have needed to pursue nuclear weapons. And so in the face of that, it has felt like there has been such a dangerous moment. And so I have 30 years of evidence that shows that when women, and especially women's peace movements, are involved in any peace building process, it leads to an actual peace agreement. And when women are involved in actually drafting that agreement, it is far more durable. So the evidence speaks for itself. My experience in working with women and in working with women's peace movements in Vancouver, for example, a few weeks ago. So after North Korea conducted their Hwasong-15, the long-range missile, last November, the U.S., the State Department said, we're going to have a meeting of the UN command countries. So do you know who the UN command countries are? They are the countries that participated in the Korean War. It was led by the United States, but it was really the first coalition of the willing. And so they were going to convene a meeting with Canada. And so we seized on the opportunity because we had seen some indication from the Trudeau administration that they were willing to be an honest broker because we know that actually Canada played a very constructive role with between Cuba and the United States. They held 7 private meetings in Ottawa, in Toronto, and that led to a diplomatic breakthrough. And so we had some indication. Trudeau had said, we're talking to Castro. Castro has a good relationship with DPRK. We'd like, if the US isn't going to step in, then Canada will, to prevent a war from breaking out. And so we thought, this is the moment. And then Canada just passed its feminist foreign policy. They just renewed their commitment to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. So we thought, the stars are aligned. We got to go to Canada. And so when they announced that they were having this co-convening, of course, my fear was they are preparing to go to war, and they need international acceptance. The UN command is already a composition of countries that fought with the US in the Korean War. These are allies of the US. The US will try to go kind of preemptive action. So anyway, we organized a gathering. 16 women activists came from Asia, from the Pacific, from the US, from Europe, Canada, and we gathered. We basically tried to disrupt, in very diplomatic ways, the meeting. We demanded our participation in the Foreign Minister Summit. We convinced Canada to convene a civil society roundtable, and at least half of it were women, most of our delegation. I was the only non-Canadian invited to that. I think they were just trying to buy me out. But we were able to influence some of them. I don't think the actual summit, because I think that was already, it was a done deal. But the senior administration officials at the Global Affairs Canada said, you guys did. And I think that we got closest to the table as we ever have. And I think this is just the beginning of how women's peace movements will influence a peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula. So Medea, sorry I took all that time. That was 15 minutes. So you take the rest of the webinar.
Well, I hope you can hear me okay. Can you? Yes. Okay. Well, one, to say it's wonderful being on with both the wonderful Nuclear Age Peace Foundation and Christina, who I would follow, and I do follow anywhere around the world, even to the demilitarized zone, as it's called. But I do want to take a moment in honor of International Women's Day, just to think about the women in so many conflict zones who are struggling under such horrendous conditions, like in Syria, like continuing in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I've had an opportunity to see their courage and the risks that they're willing to take. Also just came back a couple of weeks ago from Palestine. You might have seen the young woman, 17-year-old now, who slapped an Israeli soldier. She's facing 10 years in prison. We went to her village and met all these incredible women who are part of a resistance movement. And then to recognize that here at home, after Trump got elected, prior to that, the Black Lives Matter movement that's led most of the places around the country by women. We have the Me Too and the Never Again movements. We have the Moms Against Violence, incredible mothers whose children have been victims of gun violence, who've been speaking out. And then in Parkland, where I was down there with the students, to see these young women who are so amazingly articulate and wonderful. So I want to recognize the women all over the world who are working so hard for a more peaceful world. And in my work in particular, in addition to following Christine wherever she asked me to go, we have two programs that I'm working on as part of Code Pink. One of them is to try to stop the U.S. involvement in the Saudi bombing campaign that has been so devastating to Yemen. In fact, I was just all day in the Senate trying to lobby for a new resolution, 54, using the War Powers Act, to try to stop the U.S. military involvement. And then the other is a new campaign that Code Pink and 70 other organizations are involved in, called Divest from the War Machine, where we're really trying to dig underneath, what is causing or what is perpetuating so many of these conflicts. And you find that not exclusively, but to a large part, it is profitable for a very small sector of the economy, the weapons makers, the Pentagon contractors, but there is this layer of people who are making money from war, and we want to pull out our money from our cities, our universities, our pension funds, get our Congress people to pledge not to take money from the weapons manufacturers, and really try to divest ourselves from those companies that make a killing out of killing. And so those are some of the things that I'm involved in.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just percolating. That's still, I'm kind of reflecting on that. People who make a killing out of killing, or organizations that make a killing out of killing. That's powerful. Well, thinking about that, what you guys are both very clearly exemplifying is this compassion in the work that you do. That you're very driven by the desire to speak for those who can't speak, and to just connect in that way. And so I'm curious, with your trip to the DMZ in 2015. What sort of impact did that have for you personally and for the wider movement for peace between North and South Korea? Would you just tell us a little bit about your experience with that? What came out of that, and what did you learn from marching with women from around the world and from different generations?
So the 2015 crossing, so we marched with 10,000 Korean women on both sides of the DMZ. There were 7,000 women on the North Korean side, 5,000 in Pyongyang, 2,000 in Kaesong, and then there were 3,000 on the South Korean side. And that had largely to do with the civilian control zone that surrounds the DMZ. They can limit, or the excuse from the South Korean government, which was a hardline government at the time, Park Geun-hye, had said that they could cap it at 3,000. So that's why it wasn't like a huge number in South Korea, in Pajo on the southern side. I would say for me, the hardest, or the thing that really is that when we think about war, we think about, just obviously the devastation, the destruction, the numbers of people killed. But I feel like with the Korean War, which is 70 years old, which we have really refined propaganda on all sides against each other. And like the Cold War still lives on the Korean Peninsula. And so tonight when I show a little clip of our DMZ crossing, there was a very small minority, but because of the way that corporate media works, because of who was in power in South Korea at the time, I think we faced a level of criticism that I think has a lot to do with patriarchy, that has a lot to do with maintaining the status quo, but that we were, attacked as being naive, that we were dupes of the North Korean regime. So it was kind of like, in some ways, like I was being my own American exceptionalist, thinking that I would be immune because I don't live on the Korean Peninsula. I don't experience what the Korean women, especially in South Korea, experience in their work for peace and the reunification of Korea. So it was extremely hard, and it felt like not only did we cross the so-called no man's land of the greatest amounts of landmines, 1.2 million landmines in the DMZ. It's like we crossed our own kind of, our own, really convoluted, complicated propaganda war. But it was extraordinary to, I think, especially to hear, like in Vancouver, we had 3 South Korean women that came. And, we've heard obviously from our South Korean partners, and we've continued the work forward. We have, brought North and South Korean women to sign a letter together with international women to Donald Trump. Like, hey, we don't want war. And let's do a freeze for freeze. And so it was, I think, to hear from the South Korean women that, especially in a very dark time, this is before the Candlelight Revolution, where 2 million South Koreans took to the streets and overthrew Park Geun-hye, who was the daughter of the former dictator, that really, I think, revived democracy in South Korea. But they had been under a pretty dark period, a decade of very hardline, anti-North Korea, anti-peace governments. And so, to hear the South Korean women say, you've kind of helped revive the women's peace movement in South Korea, to kind of, and to see you cross the DMZ, it just, I mean, I hate to use the term, but like it blew their minds, that we can imagine that can be done. And I mean, I've just been watching the Olympics, and I've been watching like the athletes cross the DMZ. I've seen the performers cross the DMZ. I've seen now, just in the last 2 months, it's just been extraordinary to see the kind of exchanges that are taking place. And that's the Trump effect in some way. It's like, we often hear the pundits say, oh, Pyongyang is using their charm offensive. That's incentive for the two Koreas to get together, then try to prevent devastation on the Korean Peninsula. So I would use all my charm in the world to prevent the U.S. from totally destroying 25 million people in North Korea, and obviously the repercussions throughout South Korea. So it was deeply moving, and to be with a multi-generational, I was telling David earlier, the experience of being with Mairead Maguire, with Gloria Steinem, with Medea Benjamin, Lema Gabowi, it was like we had such incredibly prominent, seasoned women activists on this delegation, and there was no drama. I mean, there was a lot of internal fighting about, not internal, but just like debate about, because the trip was complicated. We didn't even know if we could cross the DMZ until we got to China. And still it was like South Korea was at the time saying, well, you could cross here. And we wanted to cross at Panmunjom, which is the site where the armistice agreement was signed, and so we had this huge debate going on, but we reached consensus every night. And I just think it's extraordinary to do this with women that are seasoned, who have dedicated their lives to seeing peace in their communities, in their countries, and around the world. And so that was just extraordinary, and just the hard work that goes into being, and just the last thing is, I think there were a lot of feminists on the trip that were like, oh, Gloria Steinem, and she was the hardest working. She was the oldest woman on the delegation. I think she was, how old was she at the time, Medea? Like 80. She was like 81 at the time. And Gloria worked the hardest. She was so humble. And I think it was really amazing for, I think, other feminists, because she has this, Gloria Steinem, but she worked just as hard, just as like Medea Benjamin. So anyway, it was extraordinary to be a part of that.
Wow. Thanks.
You want me to unmute this for Medea?
Can't hear. I can't hear. I'm not sure what you're asking.
Just tell her. You were muted when you told her that.
Oh, okay. Now it's your turn, Medea, to tell your experience about what it was like.
Oh, I would just add to that it's so extraordinary to see the South Korean women and how much they have been part of a movement that brought down one administration and put in President Moon, and now he's really fulfilling the mandate that they had given him. So to see the trajectory of grassroots activists, oftentimes led by women, rising up, bringing a new government into power, and then continuing to push him so that he does feel the strength at his back when he stands up against Donald Trump, when he stands up to the U.S. empire and keeps this momentum of negotiations going. I think it's extraordinary, and I'm just thrilled at what's happening right now.
Well, I want to make sure that everyone else has a chance to ask questions as well. If we have any questions, through the webinar, again, please feel free to send them through the Q&A box. Otherwise, if anyone in our audience here has any questions, please don't be shy. I have plenty of them, so I can keep going. But Clover.
I wonder if
Kim Jong-il.
Kim Jong-un, the current North Korean leader.
If his wife has somehow been a presence at these gatherings, at any kind of demonstration or local webinars.
So Clover's question is whether Kim Jong-un's wife has had any sort of involvement or presence in his work or policy of some sort.
I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows. But we know that, and I'm unmuted, yeah. We know that his sister has obviously been playing the prominent role. And I think it's very interesting the way in which women, I have to find a better word than deployed, but being used in the service of peace. I think there's something that, I know I'm treading on very dangerous waters here, Medea, so you might have to save me here, but I think it's very interesting. I mean, Kim Jong-un didn't go to the Olympics. He sent his sister, and there is a way in which her kind of demeanor and her kind of quiet, simple appearance was very well received by South Koreans. And I think that has a lot to do with patriarchy because, there's a word in Korean, yamjane, which is like a very soft-spoken, very polite lady. And in many ways, like she embodied that, right? When she, in the way that she was engaging. Yeah, and it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know if you, even preceding Kim Yo-jong going to South Korea in the Olympics was the star from the Morangbong band, which is the North Korean women's band. They wear these like short skirts with the boots and they kind of play rock music, but like Dear Comrade kind of lyrics. But, she is obviously a very, visually stunning figure. And, she crossed the DMZ with the entourage of the North Korean men delegation. But there was something about that felt less threatening, I think. There's something, a way in which I think women, I don't want to say used. I mean, I have to figure out the right language, but there is a way in which women can be disarming, I think, that can kind of bring down the kind of ways in which masculinity can get played out in conflicts. And so, yeah, being used in the service of diplomacy. But obviously what we want is for women's peace movements to be involved in this process so that we don't just leave it to the leaders to dictate the terms of whether there will be war or peace on the peninsula. And so I think what we're trying to do through this effort is to democratize the diplomatic process, to make sure that the voices of those that have been most marginalized and left out and that would be most impacted. We know that in any war that women and children are the most impacted. But we also know now that when we are involved in the process, it leads to an actual peace agreement. So I think we have a lot to gain and a lot to lose from it, but we also have a lot to contribute. And so that's why I think it's so urgent that we are involved.
I would just add that when I saw the pictures of the two delegations that just met, it was a lot of men. And I was thinking of you, Christine, and how much you've been working to get women included at the table, just like we and the women's movement have been pushing to get women included in the table around Syria peace talks, for example, because now is a really, really critical moment, and it could go in two very different directions. And certainly with the Trump administration and people in Trump's ear saying, you can never trust the North Koreans, you can't trust them, they say one thing and they do another. which is pretty much what the US does all the time. It's, I think, a time when we need to continue the pressure that you've been so great at doing, Christine, to get women involved so that it does keep the process moving of diplomacy and talks and creative kinds of diplomacy, like we saw during the Olympics, that gives more openness for President Moon in South Korea to keep, if necessary, defying the US or even pushing the US to get really into the peace process.
That's great, thank you. So just thinking about all of this, I think we don't have a lot of time left, but we would love to hear from both of you. Just, a question that came in was, can women organize a strike or walkout to demand peace negotiations around the world, or is that too aggressive a tactic? And so I think maybe, for just closing here, if you guys have any thoughts, firstly on, that specific idea, but more broadly also on ways that women can be involved in their own communities or, in the work you're doing. Just if you touch on that a little bit.
Let Medea go first. I want to hear what she has.
Well, unfortunately, we don't yet have the kind of power to be able to do that. It was interesting when Trump came out with the idea of doing a military parade, and we're not sure he's going to go through with it, but if he does, it might be at Veterans Day, November 11th, and it might be in Washington, D.C. We are organizing and mobilizing for people around the country to do peace parades and to really come out in large numbers, not just in Washington, D.C., but all over the country, to say we don't want to live in a country that glorifies militarism. We don't want to live in a country where there is a leader who wants to be saluted by the troops in the streets and the tanks, that we want to really celebrate the peacemakers and push much more, especially under Trump, to use diplomacy. And so this might be an opportunity to see how strong we are, how much we can build and merge the movements together of the Women's March and the Black Lives Matter and the people who've been doing so much work for peace over the years. That might be an opening that Trump gives us to exercise our power as peacemakers.
And just to add to that, I'm sure for a lot of the women that are sitting around the table here and others that were part of the global strike for peace, right, in the 60s, where women managed to get, right, the US and the Soviet Union to agree to stop testing of nuclear weapons. That I feel that in some ways, like, we have regressed, we have advanced in many ways, and we have also regressed. And I feel like in this Me Too moment and of women's marches, we really need to be pushing women. I mean, I feel like women are saying, stop the violence against women's bodies. Women need to be involved in domestic policies that impact our families, our bodies, our communities, our economy. But I feel like there's been kind of a glass ceiling in terms of foreign policy, and that women don't feel like we are, that it's foreign policy still seems so much the domain of men, and that, we have a responsibility to kind of see the intersection of how US military empire building around the world obviously has grave consequences for us here in the United States. So I don't know, I feel like in many ways, like, Medea is on the leading edge of that movement. I feel like Women Cross TMZ is part of that. But we are calling for a women's march, women's moment to be shaping US foreign policy that not has just like global implications, but obviously for advancing genuine security here at home.
Well, thank you so much, Christine, and thank you so much, Medea, for taking the time to talk with us. I'm sure that everybody here and in our webinar were deeply inspired, and I hope that from this, things will come from this, that we've learned a lot. With that, we're going to close out the webinar. I'm not exactly sure how to do that on my end, to be honest. But thank you again, Medea. And
thanks, Medea. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Medea.
Great. Wonderful.